The nation's best national security correspondents. His investigative work on radical Islamic fundamentalism is absolutely critical to this nation's national security. There is no one who has exhibited the same expertise, courage, and determination to tackle this vital issue. Written by the New York Times executive editor, A.M. Rosenthal. That is who Steve Emmerson is. Steve Emmerson is one of the bravest investigators, I believe, on the planet. One of the few that actually called September 11th before September 11th happened. One of the few that has been there every step of the way, calling it exactly the way it is. Now, he made a mistake, but honestly, it's a mistake that I think many of us could have made, because we have heard for years about no-go zones. And for some reason, France, England, and the left are coming after now Fox News, and I believe targeting Steve Emmerson, because he was on the air and he was talking about no-go zones. Well, there are no-go zones. But if you want to talk about political nitpicking, listen to this. No-go zones, what is that? What are you implying with a no-go zone? You're implying that the police just don't go into that area. Well, okay, is that true? Are there places here in America that either visitors or cops just avoid? There's no place here in America that I know of that the police say, I am not going in there. However, there are sensitive areas and areas so dangerous that you just don't go in unless you have to. The French call it a sensitive urban zone, not a no-go zone. This is documentation from the French government. Sensitive urban zones, ZUS. I have here, this is 35 pages of fine print towns that are sensitive, what do they call them? Sensitive urban zones. We would know them as no-go zones. So Steve Emmerson was on Fox News, and he made a statement about these no-go zones, and he said, I think, the way most people speak without accuracy, and he said, you know, it's almost like completely Muslim, or he talked about one place, almost like
Birmingham.
Yeah,
almost totally Muslim.
Totally Muslim. Well, no, it's not totally Muslim. It's 25 or 30% Muslim. However, what is the culture? I don't know. He immediately came out and he apologized profusely. Fox News gave the biggest apology I've ever seen. And now the mayor of France is saying they're going to sue Fox and Steve Emmerson for saying there was no-go zones. Something's not right here. I heard this on Friday or on Monday, and I immediately reached out to Steve Emmerson, and we haven't had a chance to talk until right now, and he happens to be on the phone now to explain what's going on. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hi, Glenn. I'm okay. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
First of all, thank you for all of the hard work that you have done over the years. You are really, truly an American who has risked it all and really spent a lot of your life. And I would have to imagine you feel at sometimes there are got to be days that you feel like you've wasted a lot of your life because nobody will listen and they're just trying to torch you. But I want you to know, I, as an American, am grateful for the things that you have done.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. You know, I'm only doing my job, and I started doing it 20 years ago because I felt nobody was looking at the real aspects then of the first World Trade Center bombing in February of 1992, and then, February 93. And then, of course, the 9/11 attacks occurred, so I established a nonprofit looking at what the government wasn't looking at, which was the political radical Islamic activities of the mosques, of the Islamic groups that pretended to be moderate or civil rights groups, but were in fact conduits for radical Islamic activities, even terrorist activities. And so that's what I dedicated my life to. And yes, I did. As you pointed out, I made a serious error when I referred to Birmingham. I was talking about no-go zones, which, by the way, is not a formal reference. I mean, governments don't recognize that term, but it's an informal reference in which policemen or firemen or government agencies won't go in to areas where there are dense Muslim concentrations for fear of their lives. And it's been reported on since 2002, of all places, the New York Times, which referenced it. Now, having said that, when I was discussing it I discussed it in England, where I talked about the Sharia police in parts of London that had basically attacked non-Muslims for not wearing the right attire. And this was reported in the BBC, is reported in London newspapers, and yet I was attacked by the BBC for saying it. And in Birmingham, I made a total error by referring to the city as totally Muslim and being sort of a no-go zone. And I was totally wrong. Within hours of making that statement, I issued a declarative, unmitigated, unreserved, unambiguous apology. I put it on my website.
Steve. Tell me what's really.
Make any mince about it, okay?
Tell me what's really going on.
Right. The reason this went viral was because of the reason there was a hatred of Fox. The Islamists, together with their alliance with those on the ultra left, have been waiting 20 years to pounce on me to make a mistake. This combined to sort of spiral out of control to the point where it seems like I was guilty of murder of some sort. The irony, of course, that the mayor of Paris, where Paris being symbolically now the top city in the world, where you would think it reigns as the symbolic city of free speech, having seen the massacre of people trying to exercise free speech, is now going to sue Fox for exercising free speech, which is actually true. I mean, I'd like to see the Parisian mayor suing Fox or suing me. On Discovery, they wouldn't get away with it.
Well, no, I'm sitting here with 35 pages of something called sensitive urban zones, which is what we, in colloquial terms, call no-go zones. That's what they call them, sensitive urban zones. It's the same thing, is it not? Or am I wrong on that?
It can be. I mean, it's an amorphous term, and I think, it fluctuates from area to area. So I think that, again, no-go zones is an informal term that the governments don't recognize. They don't want to recognize as a formal term, which is why Fox actually issued a second apology on Saturday night saying, there's no such thing as a formal, recognition of no-go zones, and we apologize for using that term. But again, there is no formal designation of no-go zones. Those are the French map listed areas where there are what they call sensitive urban zones, where there are areas that the police or firemen, or areas where government agents won't go in. There are differences in each different zone, but certainly those zones are designated as such because of the refusal by various government agencies or services to go in for fear of their lives.
Steve,
are we primarily Muslim? In fact, they're all Muslim, and in some areas they have Sharia courts. Not all necessarily. But this goes beyond necessarily those areas. I mean, in some areas it's very, very, no-go, which means nobody goes in. And in some areas they do go in when they have to go in. So I think that the definition varies. But on the other hand, you have mayors, you have chiefs of police, you have chiefs of firemen, you have journalists, French journalists, all documenting and talking about no-go zones for years.
Right, I know.
As well as articles in the New York Times or Newsweek going back to 2002 and 2005. So the notion somehow that this was just an invention of Fox is ludicrous.
All right, so Steve,
because, as you pointed out, a desire to get at Fox or a desire to get at me.
Okay, let me ask you this. If this is where France is after this attack, and they are so hyper-focused on political correctness, and they care this much about destroying somebody like you and Fox, do you think Europe has a chance of recovering from the radicalism that is infected? And I mean radicalism from both the Islamic side and the fascistic side. There is a fight for who's going to control the populace, which fascism, Islamofascism or the new neo-Nazi fascism. does it have a chance of surviving?
The correct dynamics, which is, you see a rise of this, of a right-wing and sometimes very fascistic reaction to the emergence of these radical Islamic zones and self-declared sovereignty, the Sharia courts that have been enabled by European governments, the fact that there in many countries, in Sweden as well, you will find higher rates of rape and theft and crime associated with dense Muslim migration. And I want to be very clear that I'm not saying that Muslims are responsible for all crime or anything like that, or they're responsible for all terrorism.
I'm going to let you do that, but you don't have to on this show. We're all adults.
I want to be very clear.
No, I know.
That. And I'm not associating Islam with terrorism itself, but there is such a thing as radical Islam, and it is rampant in Europe. And when I hear statements by David Cameron, who called me an idiot, but, the fact that Mr. Cameron himself has said that ISIS and ISIL and all these groups have nothing to do with Islam, and they're just monsters, I would say that statement itself is more idiotic than any statement I've ever made.
Yep.
Because they do have something to do with Islam. Yep. It doesn't necessarily mean they're equal to Islam, but it has to do with the interpretation.
They're quoting. They're the
extremists, and
they are Muslim
within Islam that we have to recognize. And to the extent we don't recognize it, it's going to fester and grow.
Right. They're quoting the Quran. They're doing it in the name of Allah and its holy prophet Muhammad. How much more Islamic do you need to be?
This is what's so amazing, too, about this.
When you have a group called the Islamic Jihad, and then you have the president, or you have John Brennan, the CIA director, saying jihad means peace and moral struggle, are we supposed to rename the Islamic Jihad the Movement for Peace and Struggle? It's a group that carries out murders, stabbings, and decapitations. So it's absurd for us to deny the connection between Islam and these Islamic terrorist groups. Again, it doesn't mean that every Muslim is a terrorist. Far from it. It's a minority, very small minority, but they have a disproportionate, especially the extremists, have a disproportionate control over the majority because they occupy the leadership position, the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, as you know, Glenn, is the parent group of almost every single Sunni terrorist group in the world, from ISIS to Al-Qaeda to Al-Nusra to Hamas to Islamic Jihad. Every single group like that pays its homage to the Muslim Brotherhood. And you know what? The only country in the world that had the courage, the bravery to name the Muslim Brotherhood and its front groups in the United States, such as the Council on American Islamic Relations, which was named a front group by the FBI as a front group for Hamas, the only country in the world that named and designated the Muslim Brotherhood and CAIR as terrorist groups was a Muslim country, the United Arab Emirates. And who came to the defense of CAIR? The United States.
Mm-hmm. Steve, I'm
ashamed of what the U.S. State Department did.
Well, I think the State Department is one of our biggest problems, and the incoming president, whoever it might be, the best thing he could do is fire every single person at the State Department. Steve, I just wanted to get you on. I wanted to hear what your point of view was on this, and I want you also to know there are millions of Americans who know you and who have learned a lot from you and who support you. And I know that your organization takes donations, and when you're up against all the powers of the world, I know how difficult it is, and I wanted to make sure that people understood that you could donate and you can help Steve at investigativeproject.org. You can also go there and learn an awful lot of information that, quite honestly, is very politically incorrect, and they have been trying to get this guy for 20 years. And he is really, truly one of the American heroes that should be remembered in history as one of the guys, as one of the Bonhoeffers that stood when no one else would stand. Investigativeproject.org. Investigativeproject.org. Steve Emmerson, thanks so much for being on the program.
Gary, thanks. Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for your very kind words.
God bless you.
And instead of all of that, they've turned it around on him. in the midst of 12 people being murdered at the hands of extremist radicals. Now he's the problem, not they. Unbelievable.
Yeah, what he seemingly
Truly
did was the equivalent of saying, Captain Crunch, that's nothing but sugar. Well, no, it's not. Actually, the first ingredient is corn.
Yeah, exactly
but I
right.
don't think that's
exactly
that
right.
big of a crazy thing. It's a higher
exactly
percentage than the average. We think we all understand that.
Yeah.
Wait, is there sugar in Captain Crunch?
I think there's a tad, a little bit.
No, you just said it was all sugar.
I did.
You lied.